All right, the last chapter of Caspian. At the sight of Aslan, the cheeks of the Telmarine soldiers became the color of cold gravy. Their knees knocked together and many fell on their faces. They had not believed in lions, and this made their fear greater. Even the red dwarfs, who knew that he came as a friend, stood with open mouths, who could not speak. Some of the black dwarfs, who had been part of Nickabrick's party, began to edge away. But all the talking beasts surged around the lion, with purrs and grunts and squeaks and whinnies of delight, fawning on him with their tails, rubbing against him, touching him reverently with their noses, and going to and fro under his body and between him and his legs. If you've ever seen a little cat loving a big dog, whom it knows and trusts, you have a pretty good picture of their behavior. Then Peter, leading Caspian, forced his way through the crowd of animals. "This is Caspian, sir," he said, and Caspian knelt and kissed the lion's paw. "Welcome, Prince," said Aslan. "Do you feel yourself sufficient to take up the kingship of Narnia?" "I don't think so, sir," said Caspian. "I'm only a kid." "Good. If you had felt yourself sufficient, it would have been proof that you were not. Therefore, under us and under the High King, you shall be King of Narnia, Lord of Carparvel, Emperor of Lone Islands, you and your heirs, while your race lasts. In your coronation, but what have we here?" For at that moment a curious little procession approached, 11 mice, 6 of whom carried between them something on a litter of branches, but the litter was no bigger than a large atlas. No one has ever seen mice more woebegone than these, and they were plastered with mud, some blood too. Their ears were down, their whiskers drooped, their tails dragged on grass. Their leader piped his slender pipe in a melancholy tune. On the litter lay what seemed better than a damp heap of fur, all that was left of Reepicheep. He was still breathing, but more dead than alive, gashed with innumerable wounds, one paw crushed, and where his tail had been, a bandaged stump. "Now, Lucy," said Aslan. Lucy had her diamond bottle out in a moment. Though only a drop was needed on each of Reepicheep's wounds, the wounds were so many that there was a long, anxious silence before she had finished, and the master mouse sprang from the litter. His hand went at once to his sword. With his others, he twirled the whiskers, he bowed. "Hail, Aslan," came his shrill voice. "I have the honor," but then suddenly he stopped. The fact was, he still had no tail. Whether Lucy had forgotten it, or her cordial, though it could heal wounds, could not make things grow again, Reepicheep became aware of his loss as he made his bow. Perhaps it altered something in his balance. He looked over his right shoulder, failing to see his tail, strained his neck further till he had to turn his shoulders, and his whole body followed. By that time his hindquarters had turned too, and they were out of sight. Then he strained his neck, looking over his shoulder again, and came to the same result. Only after he had completely turned around 3 times did he realize the dreadful truth. "I am confounded," said Reepicheep to Aslan. "I am completely out of countenance. I must crave your indulgence for appearing in this unseemly fashion." "It becomes you very well, small one," said Aslan. "All the same, if anything could be done, perhaps her majesty," and here he bowed to Lucy. "But what do you want with a tail?" asked Aslan. "Sir," said the mouse, "I can eat and sleep and die for my king without one, but a tail is an honor and the glory of a mouse." "And I have sometimes wondered, friend," said Aslan, "whether you do not think too much about your honor." "Highest of all kings," said Reepicheep, "permit me to remind you that a very small size has bestowed upon us mice. If we guard our dignity, some, who weigh by worth of inches, would allow themselves very unsuitable pleasantries at our expense. That is why I have been at some pains to make it known that no one who does not wish to feel his sword near his heart as I can reach shall talk in my presence about traps or toasted cheese or candles. No, sir, not the tallest fool in Narnia." Here he glared fiercely at Giant Wimblewether. But the giant, who was always a stage behind everyone else, had not yet discovered what was being talked about down at his feet, so he missed the point. "Why have your followers all drawn their swords, may I ask?" asked Aslan. "May it please your majesty," said the second mouse, whose name was Peepikeek. "We are all waiting to cut off our own tails if the chief must go without his. We will not bear the shame of wearing an honor which is denied to the high mouse." "Ah, you have conquered me," roared Aslan. "You have great hearts, not for the sake of your dignity, Reepicheep, but for the love that is between you and your people. Still more kindness your people showed me long ago, when you ate away the cords that bound me on a stone table, and it was then, though you have long forgotten it, you began to be talking mice. You shall have your tail again." Before Aslan had finished speaking, the new tail was in its place, and then Aslan, at his command, Peter bestowed the knighthood of the Order of the Lion on Caspian, and Caspian, as soon as he was knighted, bestowed it upon Truffle Hunter and Trumpkin and Reepicheep, and made Dr. Cornelius his Lord Chancellor, confirmed the Bugly Bear as his hereditary office of Marshal of the List, and there was great applause. After this, the Telmarine soldiers, firmly but without taunts or blows, were taken across the ford, and all put under lock and key in the town of Burna, and given some beef. They all made a great fuss about wading in the river, for they hated it and feared running water just as much as they hated and feared the woods and animals. But in the end, the nuisance was over, and then the nicest part of the long day began. Lucy, sitting close to Aslan and divinely comfortable, wondered what the trees were doing. At first she thought they were merely dancing, that they were certainly going round in 2 circles, one from the left into the right, another from the right into the left. She noticed they kept on throwing something down in the center of both circles. Sometimes she thought they were cutting off long strands of their hair. Other times it looked as if they were breaking off bits of their fingers. But so they had plenty of fingers to spare, and it did not hurt them. But whatever they were throwing down, when it reached the ground, it became brushwood or dry sticks. Then 3 or 4 of the red dwarfs came forward with their tinder boxes and set a light to a pile, which first crackled, then blazed, and finally roared as a woodland bonfire on a midsummer night ought to do, and everyone sat down in a wide circle around it. Then Bacchus and Selenius and the Maenads began a dance far wilder than a dance of trees, but not nearly a dance for fun or beauty, though it was that too, but a magic dance of plenty, where their hands touched, where their feet fell, their feast came into existence. Sides of roasted meat that filled the grove with a delicious smell, and wheaten cakes and oaten cakes and honey and many colored sugars as cream as thick as porridge and as smooth as still water, peaches, nectarines, pomegranates, pears, grapes, strawberries, raspberries, pyramids and cataracts of fruit, and then in great wooden cups, bowls, and mazers writhed with ivy came the wines, dark thick ones like syrup and mulberry juice, red clear ones like red jellies liquefied, yellowish and green, yellow green, green yellow. What for the tree people, different fare was provided. Lucy saw Clodsey shovel and the moles scuffling up the turf in various places, which Bacchus had pointed to them, and realized the trees were going to eat earth. It gave her a shudder. When she saw that the earths were actually brought to them, she felt quite different. They began with a rich brown loam that looked almost exactly like chocolate, so much like chocolate that in fact Edmund tried a piece of it, but he did not like it at all. When the rich loam had taken the edge off their hunger, the trees turned to an earth the kind you see in Somerset, which is almost pink. They said it was lighter and sweeter. At the cheese stage, they had chalky soil, and then they went to the delicate confections of the finest gravels and powdered with choice silver sand. They drank very little wine, as it made the hollies very talkative. For the most part, they quenched their thirst with deep draughts of mingled dew and rain, flavored with forest flowers and airy taste of the thinnest clouds. Thus Aslan feasted the Narnians till long after the sunset had died away. The stars came out, the great fire, now hotter and less noisy, shone like a beacon in the dark woods. The frightened Telmarine saw it from far away and wondered what it might mean. The best thing of all this feast was there was no breaking up or going away, but as the talk grew quieter and slower, one hour after another would begin to nod or finally drop off to sleep, with feet toward the fire, and good friends on either side, till at last there was silence all around the circle. But the chattering of water over the stone of Ford Abirna could be heard once more. But all night Aslan and the moon gazed upon each other with joyful and unblinking eyes. The next day messengers, who were chiefly squirrels and birds, were sent all over the country with a proclamation to the scattered Telmarines, including, of course, the prisoners of Birna. They were told that Caspian was now king, and Narnia would henceforth belong to the talking beasts, the dwarfs, the dryads, the fauns, and other creatures who were quite as much as to the men. And any who chose to stay under new conditions might do so. But those who did not like the idea, Aslan would provide another home. Anyone who wished to go there must come to Aslan and the kings at the ford of Birna on the noon by the 5th day. You imagine this caused plenty of head-scratching among the Telmarines. Some of them, chiefly the young ones, had, like Caspian, heard the stories of the old days and were delighted they had come back. They were already making friends with the creatures. These all decided to stay in Narnia. But most of the older men, especially those who had been important under Miraz, were sulky and had no wish to live in a country where they could not rule the roost. Live here with a lot of blooming, performing animals, no fear. And ghosts, too, as some added with a shudder. That's what those dryads really are. It's not canny. I don't trust him, not with all that wine and all. He won't keep his claws off us long, you'll see. But they were equally suspicious of his offer to give them a new home. Take us off to his den and eat us one by one, most likely, they muttered. And the more they talked, the more sulky and more suspicious they came. But on the appointed day, more than half of them turned up. At the one end of the glade, Aslan had caused 2 stakes of wood, higher than a man's head, and about 3 feet apart. A third lighter piece of wood was bound across them at the top, untying them, so the whole thing looked like a doorway from nowhere into nowhere. From this stood Aslan himself, with Peter on his right and Caspian on his left. Grouped around them were Susan, Lucy, Trumpkin, Trufflehunter, Lord Cornelius, Glen, Storm, Reapercheap, and others. The children and the dwarfs had made good use of royal wardrobes in what had been the castle of Miraz and was now the castle of Caspian, with wet silk and cloth and gold, snowy linen glancing through the sashed sleeves, silver mail shirts, jeweled sword hilts, gilt helmets, and feathered bonnets. They were almost too bright to look at. Even the beasts wore rich chains about their neck, yet nobody's eyes were on them or the children. The living, strokable gold of Aslan's mane outshone them all. The rest of old Narnia stood down at each side of the glade. At the far end stood the Telmarines. The sun shone brightly and pennants fluttered in the wind. Men of Telmar, you who seek a new land, hear my words. I will send you all to your own country, which I know and you do not. We don't remember Telmar. We don't know where it is. We don't know what it's like, grumbled the Telmarines. You came into Narnia out of Telmar, but you came into Telmar from another place. You do not belong to this world at all. You came here certain generations ago out of the same world which belonged to High King Peter. There you are, told you he's going to kill us all, send us right out of the world. There you are, might have guessed we didn't belong to this place with all its odd, nasty, unnatural creatures. We're royal blood, you see. And even Caspian and Cornelius and the children turned to Aslan with looks of amazement on their faces. Peace, said Aslan in a low voice, which was nearest his growl. The earth seemed to shake a little, and every living thing in the grove became a still stone. You, Sir Caspian, might have known that you would be no true king of Narnia, unless like the kings of old. You are a son of Adam, and you came from the world of Adam's sons, and so you are. Many years ago in that world, a deep sea, that world which is called the South Sea, a shipload of pirates was driven on a storm by an island. There they did as pirates would, killed the natives and took the women for wives and made wine and drank and lay in the shade of the palm trees and woke up, fought, and sometimes killed one another. In one of these frays, 6 were put to flight by the rest and fled with their wives into the center of the island up into a mountain, and went, as they thought, to hide in a cave. It was one of the magical places of the world, which links or chasms between that world and this. There are many chinks or chasms between worlds in old time, but they have grown rarer. This was the last one of the last, I do not say the last. And so they fell or rose or blundered or dropped right through and found themselves in this world, in the land of Telmar, which was then unpeopled. But why it was unpeopled is a long story, and I will not tell it now. And in Telmar their descendants lived and became a fierce and proud people. And after many generations there was a famine in Telmar, and they invaded Narnia, which was then in some disorder, but it was also would be a long story, and conquered it and ruled it. Do you mark all this well, King Caspian? I do. I was wishing I came of a more honorable lineage. You come of the Lord Adam and the Lady Eve, and that is both an honor enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar, and shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor on earth. Be content. Caspian bowed. And now, said Aslan, you men and women of Telmar, you'll go back to that island in the world from which your first fathers came. It's not a bad place. The race of those pirates who found it has died out and without inhabitants. There's good wells of fresh water, fruitful soil, timber for building, fish for lagoons. The other men of that world have not yet discovered it. The chasm is open for your return, but this I must warn you, that once you go through it, it will close behind you forever. There will be no more commerce between the worlds by that door. There was silence enough for a moment, and then a burly, decent-looking fellow among the Tamarines pushed forward and said, well, I'll take the offer. It is well chosen, said Aslan, and because you have spoken first, strong magic is upon you. Your future in that world shall be good. Come forth. The man, a little pale, came forward. Aslan and his court drew aside, leaving him free access to the empty doorway. Go through it, my son, bending forward and touching the man's nose with his own. As soon as the lion's breath came on him, a new look came into the eyes, startled but not unhappy, as if he were trying to remember something. Then he squared his shoulders and walked to the door. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. They saw the 3 pieces of wood, and through them they saw the grass and sky of Narnia. They saw the man on the doorpost, and in 1 second he had vanished completely. From the other end, the glade was remaining. The Tamarines set up a wailing. Oh, what's happened to him? You mean to murder us? He won't go that way. And then one of the clever Tamarines said, we don't see any other world through those sticks. If you want us to believe it, why doesn't one of you go? All your own friends are keeping well away from the sticks. Instantly, Rupachip stood forward and said, if my example can be of service, Aslan, I will take 11 mice through that arch at your bidding without a moment's delay. No, little one, said Aslan, laying his velvety paw ever so slightly on Rupachip's head. They would do dreadful things to you in that world. They would show you at fairs. It is others who must lead. Come on, said Peter suddenly to Edmund. Lucy, our time's up. What do you mean, said Edmund. This way, said Susan, who seemed to know all about it. Back into the trees. We've got to change. Change what? Said Lucy. Our clothes, of course. Nice fools we'd look on the platform of any English station in these. But our other ones are at Caspian's castle. No, they're not, said Peter, still leading the way into the thickest wood. They're all here. We brought them down, arranged in bundles this morning. Is that what Aslan was talking to you and Susan about this morning? Yes, that and other things. I can't tell it to you all, because there are things he wanted to say to Sue and me, because we're not ever coming back to Narnia. Never? Cried Edmund and Lucy. Oh, you two are, answered Peter, at least from what he said. I'm pretty sure he means you get to come back someday, but not Susan and me. He says we're getting too old. Oh, Peter, what awful bad thought. Can you bear it? Well, I think I can, said Peter. It's all rather different from what I thought. You'll understand when it comes to your last time, but quick, here are things. It was odd and not very nice to take off their royal clothes and come back into their school things, not very fresh now, and into the great assembly. 1 or 2 of the nastier Telmarines cheered, but the other creatures all cheered and rose up in honor of Peter the High King, Queen Susan the Horn, King Edmund, and Queen Lucy. They were affectionate and on Lucy's part tearful farewells with all of their old friends, animal kisses, hugs from Bubbly Bears, and hands wrung by Trumpkin, and last tickly, whiskerous embrace from Truffleheader. And of course Caspian offered the horn back to Susan, and of course Susan told him to keep it, and then wonderfully and terrible it was a farewell to Aslan himself. Peter took his place with Susan's hand on his shoulders, Edmund's on hers, Lucy's on his, and the first of the Tomarines on Lucy's. And so in a long line, they moved forward to the door. After that came a moment which is hard to describe, for the children seemed to be seeing three things at once. One was the mouth of a cave opening into the glaring green and blue of an island in the Pacific, where all the Tomarines would find themselves the moment they were through the door. The second was the glade of Narnia and the faces of the dwarfs and beasts and the deep eyes of Aslan and the white patches on the badger's cheeks. But the third, which rapidly swallowed up all the other, was the gray gravelly surface of a platform in a country station, and a seat with luggage around it where they were all sitting as if they had never moved from it. A little flat and dreary for a moment after all they had been through, but also unexpectedly nice in its own way. And what with the familiar railway smell in the English sky and a summer term before them, "Well," said Peter, "we have had a time." "Bother," said Edmund, "I left my new flashlight in Narnia." There we go.